Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more months than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however, emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day, and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Princeton Clark. Princeton has 18 years of experience in the personal and professional mastery space and is an international best-selling author of Awakening Your Inner Master, The Journey of Self-Mastery, and his new book, Warrior of Love, Speaker of Truth. Princeton, as well as a former contracted master coach for Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi, and host of the Evolved Mastery podcast that reaches 67 countries. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Princeton. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. And I'm excited. Before we even got on here, you see, I'm already fired up. I'm ready to go, ready to shine some light and share some love with your audience, man, and also with you. So thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, brother. Just the listeners and people watching know Princeton and I met one another in the fall of 2021 at a 365 driven event. Our mutual friend, Tony Watley, puts on an amazing event, very small, very unique, very connected. And I was honored and blessed to hang out with Princeton, even in a race car. It was so much fun, right? Just recently, as a added addition for you, I was watching some of those videos that we were taking, and when we were driving and stuff, and one of them you said, "Yo, buddy." I was just like, and it just made me smile because your energy is contagious, and you do shine a light on the world, and I really, really appreciate you, brother, and how easy it is to connect with you and become a lifelong friend immediately, almost, right? At least that's how I felt, So I appreciate you, brother. So one of the things that I focus on my podcast is a person's origin story. And for some, that's just, they say, what's your background? And people start from, done college, university, or they struggle to this. I personally believe that unless we actually share and are vulnerable from our youngest, earliest recollections to where we are today, it's hard for the listeners to know, like, and trust somebody, to know whether or not they want to reach out to Princeton for help. So I like to focus on, your earliest little Princeton memories, right, to where you are today. And, if you could do that, I'd appreciate that, because it's going to make me appreciate you even more than I do. And it'll let the listeners know that you're a real dude. So could you please share your earliest childhood memories to adulthood and where you're at currently?
Oh, man. Earliest childhood memories. I actually can remember all the way back to about 4 years old.
Wow.
And I grew up with a big family. I'm originally from small town in Virginia, Brookneal, Virginia. And I always say it's a one stoplight town. You blink once, you're halfway through it. You blink twice, you're out of it. But, it was a strong community, strong, thriving community when I was younger. And, that's something that even now I hold dear to my heart, is the power of connection, the power of community, the power of a tribe, and having people around you that love you, and so, as a kid, we grew up in a different time, like back then. I grew up in a household where it was spare the rod, spoil the child, so to speak, and so my dad, he was a great provider. I had both parents in my home. I had an older sister, Latarcia, and a younger sister, Allison, and, I had a lot of women in my family, a lot of strong men, and, on the surface, for the most part, it was the most ideal environment. To everybody else, we had the perfect family, but my dad, you wouldn't have called it abuse back then, but I was abused mentally, physically, emotionally, verbally, and it was what we call quote unquote tough love. But the way that I was really sensitive when I was younger. So, I mean, there were times where like I would be beaten to the point where I was bleeding, and told I would never be worth a penny. And, because of like the people who said these things to me or did these things, because I had such high value in them, as most kids do, we as a kid, like we know is unconditional love until we're programmed not to. And so I just had this deep sense of love. I always did. And, grew up, Southern Baptist, hellfire and brimstone message, but God is love at the same time, and, it just never made sense to me. Like, wait a minute, like God is so judgmental that even if I'm born and I don't understand anything at all and I die, I'm going to hell. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. Like, and so I always tell people I was a drug baby. I got drugged to church.
I love that.
But all in all, I was abused, and between the ages of 9 to 11, I was also molested by a distant cousin. And I didn't, as a kid, you think this stuff is normal, right? Because it's family, and nobody really talks about it. So you just think, oh, this is just the way things are. Like, this happens sometimes. And so I remember at the age of 16, my grandmother, rewind when I was really young, 5 years old, I can remember all the way back, to my grandmother, my dad's mom, saying, she would call me over to her and she would put my head in her lap and she would pray over me every morning because my dad or my mom would drop us off at her house and we would catch the bus to school from her house. And so at this point, I'm in kindergarten and she used to always pray over me and she'd say, you're going to be a great man one day. You're going to be a great man one day. And even as I got older and I hit this point in my mid-teens, 15, 16 years old, she was always that beacon of light to me because I remember going to her house and one day, just sitting there watching the Phil Donahue show and the old talk show. If you're old enough, you remember the Phil Donahue show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was back before Ricky Lake and all of those shows. But yeah, so we're watching it and it was on victims of abuse and domestic violence. And the young guy on there, I say he's young now. He's older than me, but he's young compared to what I am now. But he was sharing his story. There's a young guy on there, he's sharing his story, and it was almost identical to mine. And for the first time in my life, I remember feeling rage. My face got hot, my ears got hot, I felt violated. But not just violated. It's one thing when a stranger does something to you, but when it's family and you realize that things have happened to you that shouldn't happen to anyone, it hit me different. But because it was family, I couldn't really talk to anyone about it. I didn't really have a space to talk, to release it. And so that led me into deep depression. In high school, I was a tremendous athlete, could have went D1, running track, also playing football, but I chose not to play football. I chose to continue in track. But my grades failed. So my grades weren't there by the end of my high school year or by the end of my high school season. I was just so depressed. My mom actually found a journal in my room where I was writing about all the different ways to kill myself. And her and my dad decided to take me to a psychiatrist, which all they did was talk to me and, I'm going to give you some space to talk it out. And I didn't really want to talk it out. They put me on medication, and maybe after a week or two of taking the medication, I stopped taking it because I was like, this isn't going to change what happened to me. I hate the way it makes me feel because not only do I not feel human, I still don't feel seen. I don't feel understood. I don't feel felt. Like, this isn't going to change my reality. And so I ended up graduating high school by the skin of my teeth and ended up in gangs, on drugs, selling drugs. I was an alcoholic before I was 21. I should drink so bad I had bleeding ulcers. And, from the outside looking in, I was that person still who I was always making everybody else laugh. I was just the life of the party. If you were close to me. If you weren't close to me, it was a different story. I might knock your head off, put a gun on you, whatever. Depends on what the scenario was. But I just had no remorse for anybody. If you weren't in my immediate circle, you weren't in my family, quote unquote, I couldn't care less what happened to you. And I used to always say, I hate people. I hate the world. But in high school, I met my high school sweetheart. And at the age of 21, we decided, let's get married. We had one son, that's my 21-year-old now. And we had my daughter on the way, who's now 19, getting ready to turn 20. And I felt like, I want to give my family what I never had. But I didn't even know what that looked like. And I didn't realize I didn't know what that looked like until it was happening. And, her father committed suicide when she was 11. So around the same ages, we both experienced traumatic events. I'll say hers more so than mine, even though we don't compare trauma. But losing a parent, that's something that I've never experienced, and I can't even begin to understand what that might feel like. But all of our baggage, all of our trauma and our dramas came to the surface in that relationship. 3 years into it, I'm sitting in my car. I'm done. I'm tired. I feel like I'm not a good father. I'll never be a good father. I'll never be a good husband. I'm unworthy. I'm worthless. I've been in shootouts. I've had friends close to me. Like I've had friends shot right next to me, point blank with a sawed-off shotgun, sprayed blood all down my right side. Like I've seen things that most people only see on TV. So, when I hear people complain now, I'm like, man, you have no clue. Like you have no clue. Like your problem is a first world problem, and it's like, you don't know what this is like, but at the same time, I understand that we all have our own life path curriculum. But at the age of 23, I'm sitting in my car and I'm done. And so I decided to take my life. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I put the gun to my head. I pulled the trigger and the gun misfired. And when I say, I don't know any other way to say it than to say literally it felt like fire shot through my body. And when they say your life flashes before your eyes, I mean, it did. Like I don't even know how long I sat there, but literally my entire life just flashed before my eyes. I saw joy, I saw happiness, I saw rage, I saw anger, I saw sadness, I saw all these different circumstances. And all of a sudden this epiphany hit me. I wasn't where I was because of what happened to me. I was where I was because of how I chose to respond to it. Now, as a kid, being, in an environment that I couldn't control, that's one thing. But as an adult, at this point in my life, none of those things were happening to me anymore. They were not happening in my current now moment. So how I was choosing to respond right now was not an excuse to stay there. I was choosing to create my reality this way now. I was choosing to play the victim. I was choosing to blame people for, not being there or not showing up for me or not doing certain things for me. I was choosing to be in this space. And that epiphany, man, it shook me. But what also shook me was the realization that from the moment that gun misfired, not just that, before I say that, the sequence of events that had to happen, like this was a divine thing because that gun, I had shot it so many times. It had never misfired, never, and so I started thinking about, the bullet being packaged in that package that would in some way find its way to me. And then I would shoot that gun. And at the moment that I would go to take my life, that bullet that misfired would be in the chamber. Like, that to me spoke volumes to me. But then following that, I realized that from that moment, because we all say tomorrow's not promised, every day is a gift. But to me, it became real. Like I realized that from the moment that gun misfired, whatever life I was given following that was a gift to me, much like, you being in that car accident that you were in that you had shared with me about. It's like, it's from that moment, like you could have been gone. Every moment from then has been a gift. But sometimes it takes things happening to us to jolt us, to wake us up. And when I say I woke up. Like that week, I quit drinking cold turkey. I quit using drugs cold turkey. I walked away from gangs. Like I literally isolated myself from friends, family, anyone that was not good for me for an entire year. And I didn't know what was happening. All I knew was I wasn't going to waste my breath. I wasn't going to make excuses. I wasn't going to take the life that I had been given. I have been blessed to continue. I wasn't going to waste it and dishonor it by complaining and focusing on everybody else, focusing on who didn't do what, focusing on what I didn't have. I was going to show up, and I had to ask myself the question, and I had to make the statement, if I could create the mess of a life that I've created by not giving a damn, how much more of a blessed life could I create if, as you say, I lived like I gave a heck? If I truly lived like I cared about my freaking life, if I truly cared like I valued every breath, like I valued every opportunity, like I valued every moment, how much more of a life could I create? What dreams could I discover? And so I got hungry. But at this time in my life, like, I didn't really know a lot. All I knew was the Bible because I grew up in the Bible Belt. So I ended up going back. I got a King James Reference Bible, a student Bible, a Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, because at that time I had pastors in this space in my community tell my family I was a lost cause. They were like, you can't, it's going to take a miracle. It's going to take a miracle because he's not going to listen to anybody. Like, he's a lost cause. And so when the miracle happened, I remember praying and meditating, and I was like, God, source, universe, whatever you are. Like, my finite mind can't even begin to understand anything that's happening to me right now. But whatever you are, if you don't teach me, I won't hear it from another man. And so I went on this deep soul journey. I wanted to know, what is it that I'm truly capable of? And are there other people out there who have experienced this quote unquote awakening experience that I had experienced, where I had now become hyper aware of life? I had become hyper aware of my power to create a new life. I wanted to see if there were other people who had received messages. And so again, the only thing I knew was the Bible. So for an entire year, I read the Bible from beginning to end. I studied the Hebrew, the Greek, the Aramaic, because I wanted to understand why they said certain things, most Christians only know what they've been taught to know as it's been exegetically broken down to them. They don't know the roots. They don't know the history. They don't know the original language. This was a tribal people. They were not a literal people. They didn't communicate the way that we do. And so when you read the Bible or any biblical passages, you can't read it literally. I mean, granted, we do, but a lot is lost in translation, and I realize that. But long story short, I'm gonna try to condense it because I feel like I've lived multiple lives in one life, and there's a lot of information here, but I'm gonna fast forward it a little bit. I'm gonna make it a little faster. I ended up going back to school. I got a bachelor's of biblical studies and Eastern religion. And then from there, I became a pastor. But I didn't become a pastor just to become a pastor. I became a pastor more like Neo in the Matrix, because I was like, I'm going to become a pastor because I'm going to teach everything that's been taught wrong. I'm going to teach it right. I'm going to bring it in, and I'm going to show people the full picture, because people only see part of the picture in religion. And I was having this deep spiritual experience. And so I did that for 5 years. Didn't go over well. I got called the devil. I got called so many names, I won't even repeat them. But after 5 years, my spirit just led me to step down. And the message that came to me was, you can't use the system to change the system. You have to become something new. And that's what led me into the world of deeper studies in spirituality, personal development, professional development, because in the beginning of my journey, I said, I don't want to be a one-dimensional teacher. I don't want to be a one-dimensional speaker. I want to be able to impact any person that's in front of me, no matter where they are. And so I studied conscious psychology, human motivation, emotional intelligence, regular psychology. I wanted to understand what was the driving force behind why people showed up in the world the way that they did. What were the things motivating them? What were, the things that they were striving for? And what were the roots of why they strive for those things? What was the programming? And I studied philosophy and a lot of these things. And there were times at that time in my life where I'm literally finishing books in days. Like, I would go to Barnes and Noble because there was no social media, which I'm so grateful for. There was no social media. So there was no distraction. There was no room for anybody for me to compare myself, because I remember I had isolated myself. So all I had was books, and I would read 5 to 15 hours a day sometimes, and I would take notes, but I wouldn't be like most people are today, where they just hoard information, this event, that event. It's like I literally would read, and every day I would go in with an intention of what I wanted to grow and develop in, and I would just say, give to me what I need today. Give to me what I need for today. And so whatever I was reading, I would take notes, but I would only take notes based on what spoke to me for today. And then I would start applying action because I understood something very early in my journey. Information without application and embodiment will never equal transformation. And so I took what I could take for the day and then I did the work to embody it starting that day. Because as Tony Robbins would always say, repetition is the mother of skill. So if there's something that's speaking to me today, I'm not just going to write it down in my journal, take notes on it, and then come back and read it later. I'm going to look at my life and I'm going to say, what's one thing that I can do today to apply this? What's one thing that I can do to take this from being secondary information to becoming first nature response? And so that's where my journey with self-mastery began. Self-mastery is about surrendering to information and wisdom and insight that allows you to evolve in your life to a point where it becomes first nature. It becomes your first automatic response because you've done it so much. You've had the habit of doing it so much that it just becomes you. And I think the reason a lot of people struggle in their search professionally, personally, spiritually, is because they see information as a secondary source. They don't see it as something that they are meant to embody so that it becomes first nature. If you have the information, your brain is a computer. It's going to record information, right? It's going to record that information. And you can even retain that information and even regurgitate that information. How many of us say things all the time that we don't really live? People do it all the time. You look at social media, practically everybody on social media is doing that every single day, but they haven't embodied it. I know coaches who are considered top coaches who don't even embody most of what they teach. You know, I've worked at a high level. I've seen things that most people don't see. And I can tell you, a lot of people don't practice what they preach, but I always wanted to be an example. I never wanted to be that person. And like you said, like when you meet me, it's not like you're meeting a stranger or you're meeting someone that's above you, because I never see myself that way. Like when we connect, I connect through love. I always say love is my religion. So however I show up, that's how you're going to get me. Why? Because it's first nature. It's first nature for me to love. It's first nature for me to guide, to speak, to teach, to inspire, to connect. It's first nature for me to evolve and grow. You know, it's first nature for me to shine my light. Like but I had to develop that, you know, and that's where I say, you know, we have to surrender to the process. Mastery, when we're talking about self-mastery or any form of mastery, it's not about force. It's about surrender. And so people say, man, like it's hard for me to surrender. And I say, again, no, it's not hard to surrender. You surrender every day. You surrender to fear. You surrender to excuses. You surrender to worry. You surrender to doubt. You surrender to comparison. You surrender to all these things that don't serve you, but you don't surrender to your power. You don't surrender to your potential. You don't surrender to your purpose, because all of those things require you to become a stronger, wiser, more efficient version of you. And let's be honest, a lot of people are lazy. They've created lazy habits. I don't mean lazy just in the sense that they're just lazy and sluggish and just laying. I mean, they have lazy habits. They've become complacent. And so these were things that I never wanted to be a part of my life. So as a result, I did the work for years. I began to study metaphysics, spirituality. Like I dove deep. And fast forward, 18 years later, well, I guess it was 15 years later, I published my first book, rebranded my business, launched my podcast, which, by the way, my podcast now has gone from reaching 67 countries to reaching 95 countries.
Wow.
And so, like, it's going well. And what's crazy is I haven't really been doing a lot with it. I'm in the process of starting again. But, it just lets you know, when you just shine your light and you just show up and you're authentic and you're real, people feel it. They want to connect to it. And so, that's when that happened. Then I published my book. Right after I published my book, I got hired to work for Tony Robbins. And 15 years before that ever even happened, I already said I would work with some of the top in the industry. But I knew that I had to embody the principles, the wisdom, to the point where it became first nature. It became my vibe. It became my flow. And as I did that, fast forward, I'm working with some of the top in the industry. And then I come to where I am now. I published my second book. And now I'm just in the space of really taking other leaders to the next level, because that's who I'm really called to. People who are here to be leaders and innovators, and creators who are going to leave a legacy of change that outlives them. Everybody's not ready for that. Everybody's not ready to commit at that level. Everybody's not ready to take these first level principles to make them a first person reality. because everybody's not ready to create this as the ultimate state of their life. You know, it takes a certain type of person. And so I work with leaders who are ready to create massive impact, who are ready to move in that way. And, you know, it's been a blessing, man. You know, sorry I couldn't short that up a
Oh,
little more for you.
dude, the whole show could be about that, because, you know, honestly, and I don't say this to be that type of person that puts you on a pedestal, but as we talked, when I first met you, I just felt at peace. I felt love. And now to hear more details, yes, you spoke at the event, but I'm hearing details here that either I don't remember, because there was, you know, at those events, sometimes it's like drinking out of a fire hose, right? We
Right.
get so much information, and then we don't necessarily, we have that information. You talked about that. We look at that information, but we're really not applying it. Right.
Right.
So, you know, just some of the things you talked about, like literally people listening, I've struggled. I've been to probably 300 different events in my lifetime, right? From conferences to smaller groups. And when I think of all the notebooks of information I've written down, and sometimes I'd go back and, you know, especially it was great if I had to fly back from someplace, because then I'd be looking at my book and thinking, well, how can this apply to me? But you're right. We take on so much information, and we waste so much potential of that information, not, and which indirectly wastes our own potential of being a better version of ourselves just in that moment, in that
Mm-hmm.
day. We worry so much about, I look in society today, anxiety is so prevalent, and I do struggle with anxiety, but it's always because I'm worried about tomorrow and the future, when I should be living in the present moment and the
Right.
present day and having gratitude and being grateful. And wow, your story, you know, it impacts me even more now than when I first heard it last fall. Um, you know, just the simple things that you did. It may seem complicated for some, but the simple things you did was you isolated yourself and you read 12 to 15 hours a day, because you wanted to satiate your brain, your emotional state, your soul with something different than the pattern behavior you had before with drugs and
Right.
alcohol and gangs and everything. I know myself, some of my biggest, you know, what's the word, epiphany or just realizations were
Mm-hmm.
when 30 some years ago, when a friend of mine started handing me books and said,
Right.
you need to read this. No social media. I like when you brought that up too. Social media is a blessing and it is a curse.
Right.
People utilize it as an escapism. They associate, and you know, that comparison game. And so, you know, I love though you talked about that first part of me, nature response, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is who I am. This is my first nature response,
Mm-hmm.
to automatically be kind, to be compassionate, to level up and help other people climb. And indirectly, that energy that you see from people, like, you know, when you and I met, maybe you're feeding off of that. And that's a good thing, because
Right.
we're now in a synergy. We're in a situation where every time I seen you throughout the event, or when we were sitting in that race car together, and when we were sitting at a table together, when we were having just, you know, commonality conversations, I look back at that and I have not forgotten that.
Yeah.
Right. And I hang on to that in a good way, because
Right.
that's what I want my table of life to be, is
Mhm.
people like Princeton and people listening. That's what you should want. But it all starts by making a decision to disconnect the associations, as Princeton talked about, and doing the work, doing the actions. Don't be that poser. Don't be that person that's watching, you know, life fly by and presenting yourself as somebody that has their act together.
Right.
Vulnerability, storytelling, you know, being able to connect with people and not worrying about what they think when you share that story. I imagine some people, when you share your story, they become immediately disconnected. And it's nothing to do with Princeton and never about you. It's about them and the ability for them to grasp the fact or have that connection. Like you said, you heard from somebody on Dr. Phil, and you know, it created rage in you,
Right.
because now it come to light. Instead of being compartmentalized, it come to light, and you realized that, oh my gosh, what I've gone through is terrible. And
Mm-hmm.
it took you a little while to get to a point where, like you said, you changed your associations and you did all that work to better yourself. And you know, I think I don't know if the listeners heard that, but you went to biblical school, you become a pastor, but then you had this realization, whether it was God speaking to you. I can't remember if you said that, if it was something that just a voice said to you, like, listen, you can't do it the same way. And
Right.
I bring that up so that the listeners realize doing things the same way consistently, expecting different results, is a definition of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Really, we're on a treadmill, we're on the hamster wheel of life. And that is amazing that you decided to step out of that and realize that, what, I can be the best version of support and service to others by not doing it the same way that everybody else has said. Because really, what is life? It's pattern teaching. Do the same thing, the next generation does the same thing, and then we get the same outcomes throughout the world when it comes to wars, when it comes to strife and trials and tribulations. So I appreciate you being so vulnerable. It's obviously, like you said, excuse me, there's probably other details there that you didn't want to get into right now, but I do appreciate it, because so many people have a hard time being vulnerable. And your vulnerability, I guarantee there's going to be people listening and watching this that it's going to change their lives, because my connection, my realization of certain things and my focus has shifted since meeting you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just realizing, and then, like I said, and that's why people listening, watching, if you connect to people in your life, make sure you do follow them if they're on social media. Keep on fostering that little spark, that little ember, into a raging fire in a good way inside of you. So if you relate to Princeton, make sure you follow him. Make sure you get his books. And if you're blessed like me to meet him and call him your friend, you're even farther on the journey than most people would be on this planet, right? So I appreciate that. So Princeton, you specialize in working with people through self-mastery, and you did talk about some of this as you were communicating. Many times when one hears that term mastery, we automatically think of working hard to accomplish and becoming the best at something, anything. What exactly, though, is the true meaning of mastery in regards to living our daily lives?
Again, even going back to it, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to dive into that a little more. A lot of times people hear mastery, whether you're talking about business mastery, self mastery, any aspect of life mastery, it's this force, like I gotta hustle, I gotta grind. There's like this really low vibratory state of, being that people like, it's gotta be hard. Like it's, and in some cases it's that state of thought is what motivates people, and I always tell people, like, no, you don't need to think that way. Mastery is not about force. It's not about, it's about surrender. It's about being able to show up every single day. As I always say, surrendering to the things that are in alignment with your power, your potential, and your purpose. But first, you got to get a vision for your life. You got to understand or start to unlock that potential. As you start to unlock that potential, you have to start surrendering to giving it power. That means creating habits that are going to fuel that potential. And as you fuel that potential, you begin to find purpose in ways that you can serve. Because I always say purpose is about service. And so as you begin to discover the potential, you begin to find different ways and to create different habits that become first nature responses to start to ignite that potential. And then you begin to give that potential power, and the power starts to develop more clarity, more sense of purpose, and you begin to manifest. It becomes automatic, almost in a sense. And so it's like, I wake up, like my book, like I could have went out there, I got to hustle, I got to share my book, I got to promote my book, I got to do all that, but I just surrendered to the process of life. Now, I'm not going to say that's going to happen for everybody that writes a book. Just write a book, get a job, start focusing on something else. I'm not going to say that's going to happen for everyone else. But I do believe in the process of, seed time, harvest time. I believe that you reap what you sow, and so I believe that a lot of doors that open for me are as a result of work that I've been doing consistently, committed to over the past 18 years. Like, you're not just going to start tomorrow and all of a sudden every door opens up for you. You have to sow the seeds. You have to show your life that, look, I'm surrendered to this process. I am surrendered and I am committed to loving me so much every single day that every day I'm not trying to be perfect every day. I'm just trying to progress. I'm just getting better. I'm just learning. I always tell my clients, what's one thing that you can do every day just to step one step closer towards your vision, one step closer towards your goal? You want to be able to say at the end of every day, even though I may not be where I want to be, today I am better. Today I loved myself enough to go work out. Today I loved myself enough to eat a healthier diet. Today I loved myself enough to write my vision and make it plain and to create goals to attain that vision. And today I made myself better because I reached out, I asked for help, I connected to people, I served someone else today. And it's not, you may do all of those things, you may do one of those things, but life is not about perfection, it's about getting better. And so I surrender to the process of getting better every single day, and that's what motivates me. And sometimes that means, like this year, the first 6 months of the year, I stopped coaching, I stopped speaking, and I focused 100% on me. I had to go in, I had to reassess the stories that I was telling myself about business, the stories I was telling myself about people, the stories I was telling myself about myself, the stories I was telling myself about relationships. I had to go in and I had to do an evaluation of those stories. And then I had to ask myself, are those stories true, or are they just programs that I've created that now keep me from surrendering in one area or more areas? And as a result of that, I have blind spots. I have to do that for myself. I have to practice what I preach. And so I took 6 months to just find those stories. And guess what? As I went through those stories and I got rid of those stories, I surrendered to the process of then clearing out my reality. So some of those stories had created aspects, relationships, connections, and even directions in my business that weren't in alignment with me anymore. They were in alignment with stories that I was telling myself. And so once I went in and I assessed those stories, and I walk my clients through the process of learning how to do this, but in short, once I did this, guess what? I ended relationships. I started changing the vision for my business in a way that it was in alignment with me authentically. I started clearing out my reality, all the busy stuff. I went in, I got clarity emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. I started working out more consistently again. And so this assessment, I want it to be better. And I tell people all the time, sometimes it's okay. Know that it's okay to have those cocoon moments. The cocoon moments don't always feel good, but when you're going from being a worm, traversing the tough terrain of the ground of your experience in life, there comes a moment in time where you get tired of traversing that same path, and something in you leads you into the space of isolation where it's just you versus you. And within that cocoon, you are dissolved, you are reformed, you are transformed. And if you allow the process, if you trust the process, and during this process, if it's really challenging, get a mentor, get a coach. Ask for recommendations for books that you can read through the process. You don't just have to go through it and try to get all the answers, because 9 times out of 10, you have blind spots, so you're not going to see everything you need to see. And so reach out to people. You have not because you ask not. If you're in a challenging situation right now, reach out, to the people around you, reach out to the circles, reach out to leaders, post something on social media, go live and share a story and say, hey, I'm looking for books. I'm growing through this phase in my life right now and I'm leveling up. What are some books that you have about transforming your life or growing through tough situations or overcoming or making one moment or one step shifts in your life? Like, what are books that you guys know about? Put it out there. And then take it seriously. Again, every breath is a gift. With each breath, you become something new if you choose to. The breath is the paint, the body is the brush, the world is your canvas. And no matter how you choose to show up, whether you call your reality beautiful, you call it ugly, whatever you label it as, no matter what you define it as, it's still your masterpiece. So you got to be intentional about these cocoon moments, because you're not meant to do it alone. And a lot of us feel like we do. And maybe we've never had anyone there, so we just don't trust that somebody's going to show up. But you got to stop waiting for people to show up, and you got to show up. Reach out. Ask for help. because the human race, the human species was designed for connection. We were not designed to disconnect. And that's why depression is where it is right now. Because we isolate ourselves and we feel like we got to go through it all alone. We're afraid to be vulnerable. And that's why I'm so vulnerable, because I want to show people that it's okay to be vulnerable. It takes more strength to be vulnerable than it does to be strong. Vulnerability is true strength. When you can share your story and the power of your story, understanding that everything that happened in my life didn't happen to me, it happened for me. And you can honor the wisdom that that experience brought you to show you how to love yourself, to show you how to create more joy in your life, to show you where you're not taking value in each moment. It came to show you where you were neglecting yourself or you were allowing things into your life that weren't meant to be in your life. It came to give you wisdom so that you could be a light to other people who are going through something in their life. You know, I look at my life and I don't say, like I used to at one point, that my life is cursed. I used to really believe that I'm cursed. Like, some people go through this, some people go through this. I'm going through all of these things. But now I realize with every one thing that I got to grow through, not go through. That's low vibrate. No, everything that I got to grow through gave me wisdom. And with every one thing that I've had to grow through, there is at least 1 million people out there struggling with just that one thing. And so now, through my vulnerability, I get to share the power. I get to show people the other side of it. And that's why vulnerability is powerful. You know, I think as a leader, we owe it to the people that we want to impact to be vulnerable. To say, look, I'm human just like you. But the only thing that separates us is our perception. One of my favorite quotes is, if you change the way you see things, the things you see will change. And so I changed the way I saw my life. I changed the way I spoke about my life. I changed the way I saw people. I changed the way I saw the world. Like I used to say, I hate people. I hate the world. Now I love everybody. I love the world. I love everything. It's like, I get to experience this life. My life. I am an original blueprint. There will never be another Princeton Clark on this planet like me who has walked my path. I am an original blueprint. Everybody out there listening or watching, you are an original blueprint. So you might as well be the best damn original blueprint that you can be. Screw what other people think. Screw how other people feel. Give a heck about your life and show up like you truly give a heck. Because if you don't, guess what? You can't complain about results you don't get for the work that you don't do. You are the root to the tree of your life. And if you don't see the fruit, if you don't see the manifestation in the branches of the tree of your life, mentally, in the mental branch, the emotional branch, the physical branch, the spiritual branch, the financial branch, the professional branch in its totality, if you're not seeing the fruit, it's because at the root, you're not sowing the right things. You're not feeding it the right things. You're not giving it the right things. So it does you no good to point at the roots or the branches, and to complain about the fruit that's not showing up. And I just don't understand why. You understand why. You haven't developed the habits. You haven't surrendered to the process. You haven't done the work. You haven't fed the root. You did just enough to appease your ego to make you feel good about where you are and then talk about it. Look at what I've done. You know, I just achieved this and I go, okay, good for you. What's next? Change is the only constant. If you're not changing and growing, you're dying. So if you stay in one place for too long and you're not growing, guess what happens? Some aspect of your life is going to suffer. It's going to die. You know, and so it's just taking extreme accountability for that, man. And realizing that as I go through this process, I didn't get to where I am by myself. My mentors for a long time, I started with Les Brown, Zig Ziglar, Dr. Wayne Dyer. You know, when I really started diving deeper, you know, and I learned so much. And I used to buy CDs, man. CDs.
Dial me back. I was just gonna say cassette tapes and Les Brown and Zig Ziglar. I used to all the time.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely, all the time. And the journey that you talk about, and you know, admitting that we are stuck, celebrating too long. Some of the points you brought up, and you know, we're successful. And then there's lots of people out there that aren't really successful or present themselves as being successful. As you mentioned earlier in the conversation, they have money so they can go out and spread a false seed. They're
Right.
not really, they're posers. They're not really legitimate. And I struggle too. I go through those times where I've had, even in the last 2 years, growing this brand from my original financial practice, building this Give a Heck brand. I've had some successes and I sat back on my laurels, but you're right. What's next? You need to
Mhm.
celebrate. You need to enjoy the journey along the
Right.
way to getting that success. I want the listeners to understand that too many people don't do that either. They're so driven
Yeah.
that they're doing something like an Ed Milet would do, where he talks about 3 mini days. And it's just like, are you kidding me? Where
Mhm.
I can't do that. Like, obviously he's figured out how to do those, plus enjoy the journey. I need to enjoy the journey, because there's too many times in life I've
Right.
strived to get to a goal and forgot along the way to get to that journey, or pardon me, to enjoy the journey. And then I get to that goal, and then I've gotten sometimes where I don't celebrate and I go to the next one. So it's not tried and true. Sometimes I celebrate too long. Sometimes I don't celebrate at all or not enough. And life's a journey, people.
Yeah.
All right.
You know what?
Yeah.
I think, there's definitely a balance between that, but this is the key. It's like the quote, if you do the thing that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And so it's like when I live a lifestyle that I love because it's become first nature, every day becomes a celebration while I'm working and building and manifesting. Every day is a celebration because I get to live it.
Well,
I literally get to love people like this every day, even through my challenges. Like I get to, but in the beginning, let's be honest, in the beginning, it takes time to get to that
oh,
point,
absolutely.
and you got to do the work in order to become first nature, to become first nature. So in the beginning, it's important. If you don't know how to slow down to appreciate the growth, to appreciate what you get to do and what you have done, you do yourself a major disservice, because it's like working, building, your growth basically becomes a job. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of people who become knowledge hoarders. It's like this personal, I think there's also something that I've been talking about lately is toxic positivity. It's like where everybody's showing up and they're doing all this great stuff and life is still happening to them. And life is still hitting them, but because they don't slow down to acknowledge the emotional hits, the mental hits, the stresses, guess what? Just because you don't acknowledge it and you're so positive doesn't mean it's not happening to you. So you still have to give yourself space and grace to process through that. You have to. There's going to be days, I tell my clients, you got to have the 2 P's, the passion and your purpose. Your purpose is what you serve to other people. Your passions are the things you do just for you, to celebrate you, to honor you. So throughout the week, I always tell my clients, let's plan 2 to 3 days where you focus on something that you're passionate about, something that just makes you happy. And if you don't know what that is right now, go out and do something you've never done before. Try to discover new things, because a lot of people, they're so stuck in being where they've been that you ask a lot of people, like, what do you enjoy doing? Most people are going to say, I don't even know. Like, I haven't done
Well,
anything in so
they're stuck
long.
on a hamster wheel, and
Right.
look at society though. We're taught to go to work, go home, get paid. We live by Monday to Friday, and we're, for the weekends, and then people get into addictive personalities on the
Mm-hmm.
weekends, and they convince themselves it's okay. Their most valuable time is outside of their 9 to 5, even if it's their own business, and they're not investing in themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to the point where people say to me, oh, I'm so excited about the weekend. It's the weekend? And they'll look at me and go, what do you mean? I live every day with joy and gratitude. And if I
Mm,
need to do something and accomplish something and it's a Saturday, guess what? I'm doing it. If it's a
right.
Sunday, Sunday for me is my worship day, but that doesn't mean that if I need to have a call with somebody, or I've even done podcast on a Sunday, or I've had a client call, I still do my worship. I go to church, I do my prayers, I come home, and I still have the rest of the day. God's not looking down on me. Man has told us that God is the way he is, right?
Yeah.
But it's such a patterned taught, like organized religion, and I'm not here to pick on it, because I belong to an organized religion, but I treat it like a buffet. I take what I
Right.
like, I leave what I don't. I think you and I had that conversation. It's just the way my life is. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't see Monday to Friday anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is life every moment. And I like how you talked about it. Appreciate your breath. I do that as part of my gratitude. Thank you for letting me have oxygen and be able to breathe, right? Just simple things that, listeners, it's not complicated, but it's also not easy, because you are going to be uncomfortable when you start stretching your vision. You will be.
Yes.
And make sure, like Princeton said, make sure you have good associations and mentors on this journey. Like you stepped back for 6 months, right? I've done that too, but I'm also involved in a mastermind, couple different ones. I have people I can reach out, I communicate to, that actually help me continue to level up my life. So you don't have to do it alone, is what I'm getting at. And that, if you haven't heard that resoundingly from Princeton, trust me, you can't and don't need to do it alone. For me, my number one association, though, that's helped me through all my childhood trauma, to adult trauma, to divorce, to losing my granddaughter, the list goes on, still for me is God. And, for those that are listening that aren't God fearing, that's fine. If it's the universe that keeps you clicking along, good, whatever works, as long as you're always trying to level up and step up and quit staying camped in your life, having that 9 to 5 mentality, Monday to Friday. You are worthy. You deserve more. And in order to give a heck, you have to do those little baby steps, those little changes, and celebrate it at the end of the day. Look back in your day. Quit telling yourself you're having bad days. I've had to program myself on that too. And Princeton can probably agree. Quit saying you're having a bad day. It's now discounted anything else that's happened in your day. It's even discounted the fact that you had appreciation, the fact that you were alive, that you woke up, that you were given another shot. So don't do that disservice to you. And if you're God-fearing, I'm doing a disservice to God too, because he's given me another day. Right. So it's how I look at things, but I'm a work in project. Right. I've been working on myself since I was, I grew up in the 80s and get into the 90s, and I started having people give me books and come to this seminar, come to this session. Initially I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is all fantastic. And I drank everything like it was Kool-Aid, and I believed it all until I got mature enough to realize that what was, pure crap nonsense, and what was actual something that I could apply into my life. So stuff that it's crap might be something that somebody else can apply, and that's great, but we're all unique individuals, as you mentioned, right? So it's just amazing.
Man.
So,
it's a beautiful journey, man. And
absolutely.
I love how you brought up, like the greatest source for you for wisdom has been God. And being, again, studying the Bible and reading things. You and I had great conversations around this, when you were out here in Arizona. And it's Paul says it in Romans 1, God is clearly seen in all things, but we do not acknowledge this aspect of God. Instead, we create a God in our own image, our own likeness, after the image of corruptible man, 4-footed beasts and creeping things. He's saying, ultimately, we've turned God into this idol that thinks like man, responds like man, judges like man, but God is life. God is all things.
He's breath. He's everything.
Breath. The word spirit. When we talk about, when Jesus was baptized, and I'm not trying to take this into a religious conversation.
That's okay.
But the spirit is what I always say, the spirit leads me in everything that I do. But the reason I say that is because when you study the original text, like Jesus spoke Aramaic, he didn't speak Greek. The New Testament of the Bibles that we have are translated through Greek. And so a lot is lost through translation, even though we know Jesus never wrote anything. It was other people writing. But when you see like the passage, for instance, when it says he was baptized and the spirit descended upon him like a dove, the word spirit in Aramaic is ruha, and it means breath. So when it says that, what happens when a person is baptized and they come out of the water? They
You're
breathe.
Right. Yeah.
And this represented transition. This represented a pivot into the process of him leaving his legacy to the world. It represented change in that moment. And so they saw the peace come upon him like a dove. Can you imagine that breath? Like he didn't come out. He wasn't drowning. He willingly submerged himself to be baptized, recognizing that when he came up, all the old would be gone and he would be anew.
Yeah, surrendering.
To start,
it was all surrendered. It was all surrendered, and it was just, And we will go through that from baptism even into our current adult lives.
Right.
Even your 6-month process, you give up your stories, gave up some associations, some friends, whatever, and you surrendered. It's like we go through baptism our whole life,
We
right?
do.
Right. We have those moments where we need to surrender and we need to bring our head up out of the water and just, God is good. God is great. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus, for everything that you've given me. I can't wait for the next moment, which is 1 minute from now. I can't, like I always tell people, even right now, you and I talking, the past has already happened in our initial part of this conversation.
Uh-huh.
We are in the present, and right now, a minute from now is the future. What am I going to do with that next minute, the next hour? How am I going to surrender myself to being the best version of myself? And if I have that moment where I'm struggling, time myself out, right? Time
Yeah.
myself out, reground myself, whether it's through appreciation, a podcast, a book. Oh my gosh. I do a lot of work, listeners, though. Those of you that have been listening to me for a while or know me personally, I'm a work in project till the day I take that last breath that God was so gracious to give me my whole life. And now
Right.
decided I don't need that breath. Now I need to come home. I need to, go to the next level of my life, right?
Leave this earth suit. I always say this
Yes.
body is nothing more than an earth suit. It's like astronauts need a suit to go into outer space. My spirit, my breath needs a housing system to function in this 3D reality that we call life. And
Yeah,
so it's like
100%.
at some point, this suit is going to go back to the dirt. It's biodegradable. It's going to go back to the dirt, and it's going to release my breath. When they say a person dies or transitions, what do they say? They took their last breath.
Yeah.
Once that breath is gone, the body cannot survive without it. We are not the body. We are the breath of the body. We are consciousness. We are God expressing itself in form.
And when you can realize what you're saying, death is not something to fear.
Not at all.
Not at
Not at
all.
all.
Right. I used to be fearful of death, but once I embraced my purpose of what I wanted to do and became passionate about it and realized that God put me here so I can, touch, affect, uplift one individual. And as you and I talked before we started recording, even, I just, I don't complicate life, people. Right? I don't know how else to put it. We overcomplicate things.
Yeah,
Right?
I always tell people life is simple. We're the ones that complicate it.
Well, man, like you talked about with religion and how we look at the Bible and how we look at God. And when I stopped taking all that noise and just said, you know what? I understand organized religion. I understand this and that. It's still a community for me. I enjoy it, but I treat it like a buffet. I leave what I like. I don't like part of me. I take what I like and I move forward. And any of the judgment of the people within that community of the church I go to stays there. I walk away from it. They aren't the people I'm associating with. And then I have specific ones that I really associate with. I go there for me to remove myself from my house to get closer to a place because God's present everywhere.
Right.
But there I can focus and shut out some of the noise so that I can give God that time.
Yeah.
So I can give me that time because I am that valuable.
Yes.
Right. I have to add value to myself. And I never used to do that, Princeton. Right. And that's why people say, why do you go to church? Blah, 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 blah. You think you're better than us? No, I don't think I'm better than you. I think I'm a person on a journey of life that knows what I want to do to continue on that journey, continue to climb and not always get to a point where I'm camped too long. Because, self-pity and, oh, boo-hoo, woo-hoo, that happens all the freaking time. And it's because we don't release ourselves and give ourselves permission to, let it all out and go through a healing process. And so yeah, man, I have so many other questions, but I got one more last question. I'm going to wrap it
go
up
ahead,
here.
Go ahead. I got a little bit.
Dude, if you don't know how much I prepare for, I literally, we need to have a part 2. If you
we can do
bless
it.
me with that, I'd appreciate it like very soon. So that it just, I have some great questions and your thought process and just, we won't get into it today, but just stuff like The Secret. and your opinion on stuff like that, and
Mhm.
how people don't take action. So we'll have another episode because we just have so much going on in this conversation, and none
Mhm.
of it's wasted on the listeners or especially me. So I really appreciate you. So if you had to give Princeton, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Listen, we're given this life one time. I can only be me in this dispensation of time. And so many times we live, again, going back to what I said earlier, we live our lives as though tomorrow is promised. But when we understand that tomorrow is not promised, at the end of the day, we're not even worried about tomorrow. My biggest focus and what I like to challenge people to do is live your life out loud without comparison. You know, a lot of times we get these visions, we get these inspired ideas, and then we shrink back. People shrink back and they don't give themselves to it. You know, and this happens because the brain goes into one of two states anytime you go to step into something new. It either goes into the remember wins, because remember, the brain is a computer system. It's been recording information from the time you were born up to this current moment. It can't measure or quantify what it hasn't experienced yet. And so what tends to happen when we go to step into something new is we go into this stage where the brain goes into this remember when and what if. What if it doesn't work out? What if I share it and then people laugh at me because it hasn't manifested yet? You know, what if I don't do it? What if I start, you know, or remember last time you said you were going to do something and you didn't do it? Remember, your brain is only measuring and communicating to you based on what has been, not based on what is. And so what I challenge you to do is step into this moment, shine your light, and don't worry about the remember wins or what ifs. Don't create a big wall out of that and turn it into fear. Step into it and realize that the only reason you're feeling that way is because as you step into something new, you can't measure what you haven't experienced. And what all that means is that you get to experience something new. Don't let yourself get pulled back into that comfort zone where you're comfortably miserable, and shine your light. I always tell people, you know, my light's only going to get brighter. So if me showing up vulnerably and showing up powerfully is affecting you and making you feel some type of way because you choose to judge me, and with whatever measure you judge with, it has to be measured back to you. So what you're ultimately feeling is what you put out into the world. Then, hey, be in that space, but I'm going to keep climbing. I'm going to keep going. Stop being afraid to speak your vision. Stop being afraid to say what you want. Stop being afraid to step into your life fully because you're too caught up in the remember wins and the what ifs, and think about what now. What now? What now? What am I going to create right now? What am I going to manifest right now? What do I get to manifest right now? Because you should want to live your life so that when you take your last breath, you're not a fading memory, but instead you are a memory that's never forgotten.
Wow, that's so true. And that ties to legacy.
Right.
Are you, I hear people, especially in my financial planning business, and when I coach people on the lifestyle side, they're, you know, I talk to them about legacy. What is your living legacy? Are you leaving behind, if you take your last breath today, are you going to be remembered? Are you going to be remembered for bad things? Are you going to be remembered for good things? A combination of them both. I work on every single day with my clients for now 20 years, creating a living legacy. You're living it right now. You're creating the legacy. That's the living legacy part for me. And when I pass away, like if I passed away right now, 5 minutes after we're done recording, literally there's so much content that I've been vulnerable about that my kids that haven't even been born yet, my current grandkids that aren't able to actually you know, understand because they're so young, are going to know what their grandpa was like. They're going to know what their papa was like. My kids that aren't necessarily connected to me on that level yet because they're adults figuring out their own way, they're going to be able to go and research. They're going to read my book. They're going to listen to my podcast. They're going to listen to my vlogs. They're going to have all this content. And I'm going to continue to build that living legacy so that they can know that I was genuine, that I was real, that I had good moments, bad moments, that I had struggles with my faith, that I didn't have struggles with my faith, that I thought that the world in regards to politics is absolutely ridiculous and is all about causing division and disparity. And just, I just want to love on people like you, Princeton. I just want to know the world that I give a heck, because I had to give a heck about me, and I'm never going to stop working on that give a heck person. That's me, so that I can shine a light and give a heck so much more about people than I have, because I've never can say I've helped enough, right? That last breath comes and I do that like you talked about. I want to know that my living legacy that I created throughout that path, first and foremost, helps my family, and then has been broadcast out to, even if 7 billion people on the planet, even if it's a 0.1 of 1%, that I've made a difference.
Yes,
that's a pretty damn good life.
Yes.
Right.
And
right?
we get to do it. We get to live this
because
life.
because we choose to live this life. We
That's
choose to embrace it. We choose to appreciate what we've been given, instead of sitting back and worrying about everybody else and their garbage. And it's all garbage, because at the end of the day, if it is not uplifting me, it's not enlightening me, it's not giving me energy, all it is an anchor and pulling me back in life. And I just I don't tolerate that anymore. Right. In my 50s, I just I've had enough, and I only want to be around the willing. That doesn't mean that if you're willing that you're not struggling. It means to me that you want to change, and that I can maybe elicit some change in you, or maybe we can work together to elicit change. Maybe you got a strength somewhere where I'm still weak, and we become a one person. Right? They talk about unity of a husband and a wife getting together and creating one. Well, you can do that, in my opinion, with friends, with associations. You can come together and be your individuals, but in certain points in time on your journey, you're together as one to elicit a message that together you're more impactful than one. If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Then again, I should get off my soapbox.
Man, I'm loving it, brother.
Right.
I'm loving it. I'm honored to be here. Thank you. We're definitely gonna have to do a part two.
We got to do part two, because I got about 6 questions here that I really believe that my listeners and even myself, and people don't realize, my podcast and your podcast probably too, I learn more than my listeners do, because I'm so engaged in it, and I put so much time into it, and I review it after the fact. I listen to it after the fact, because it's knowledge that it doesn't have to be trapped. Like you talked about earlier, I'll leave it on this and then we'll wrap up. We talk about knowledge, and the biggest thing that I tell people, I'd rather have ignorance on fire than knowledge on ice. There's people out there that'll do what you've done in the past, you still continue to do, or I do, read, listen to books, gain knowledge, and they do nothing with it. Sometimes you need to be ignorant, have that go out and have ignorance on fire as you're going through the process, learning knowledge, applying the knowledge. Oh my goodness, I tripped, I skinned my knee, get up, start again. Then to be that person that's so book read, they're so school driven, yet they've done nothing. They've applied nothing, and they've just lived a life in quiet desperation. I've been that person. I refuse to ever go back. And I know, along with you and we are going to continue to change one person, like you said, then it spider effects out. Right. So it's all good. So our time is almost up. I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way to reach you, brother?
Oh man, I say my link tree and my Instagram. So at Princeton Clark is the best way to reach me. Any updates or anything will be in my link tree. So you'll find my websites for PrincetonClark.com or evolvedmastery.com. And you can also see new programs that I have coming. I'm getting ready to start doing seminars and new events and retreats here in Arizona. It's getting ready. The weather's about to go from being hot to being really, really nice. So I'm excited about this next season. But also my podcast, Evolved Mastery. You can check it out. It's on all major streaming platforms, Amazon Music, Apple Music, or Apple Podcasts, as well as Spotify and iHeartRadio. So you guys can find me pretty much anywhere, or you just Google my name, Princeton Clark, and you'll see other interviews and everything that's online. You'll see my books. But Instagram, if you want to reach me directly, you appreciate the podcast, you appreciate what we discuss, you just want to show some love, at Princeton Clark on Instagram.
I'll make sure all of what you just shared is in the show notes. New listeners to the show, you can find all the information about this episode and the links that Princeton has been gracious to share at giveaheck.com. And go into the podcast portal. You'll see Princeton's smiley face, and you'll see the details below, some little synopsis of the show, as well as all the connections and how to get a hold of them. So thanks, brother, for being on, man. This has been amazing. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Princeton. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.